What is OSR? Old School Renaissance, Old School Revival, Oh Shit Run. There are so many different terms to this acronym, but we all know it in the community as the Old School Revival. Now, what exactly is this Old School Revival? Today I wanted to dive into what the OSR actually means and the styles of play therein. How's it going, everyone, and welcome to No Fun Allowed. Today I wanted to dive into the topic of the OSR, something that I've been diving into quite heavily recently. So the OSR is a movement that has been started for quite some time, and to put it simply, OSR games are a reflection of the past. However, many OSR systems we see today have some modern renditions that make them much more palatable. Here on the totally reliable network that is Wikipedia, we get told that the Old School Revival, Old School Renaissance, or simply OSR, is a movement among players of tabletop role-playing games, specifically D&D, that draws inspiration from the earliest days of tabletop RPGs in the 1970s. Now, like me and many people, we weren't even alive in the 1970s. We didn't even exist. So a lot of newer people are getting into the hobby that is D&D and slowly figuring out what the OSR is. We're seeing that D&D hasn't been the same game for the past 50 years. No, of course, it has changed drastically over time. And how has it changed? Well, in reality, the tonality of the game has changed. What we expect out of the game, what the PCs get up to, and of course the game systems therein. As it states here, there is less emphasis on linear adventure plots and overarching meta plots and a greater emphasis on player agency. Frequently, they are built around older rule systems made available by the open game license. So right there, that's telling us that in today's day and age, when we're running our games, we typically have these grandiose plots and epic movements and a story that is structured. But the days of old, that wasn't like that. Many adventures were simple in their design, and they weren't directly tied to the PCs. And in fact, many grand adventures weren't spawned by some big module here. No, they were simply spawned by the player agency to go out and explore and adventure on their own. Now, the second part there, the open game license. What is that? Well, the OSR has been made possible by Wizards of the Coast releasing the open game license in 2000, which allowed the free and unapproved use of large amounts of creative rules, mechanics, material related to the D&D game. This meant that instead of everybody trying to make a new game system, you can grab the very awesome, simple mechanics of D&D and make it your own. Now, if Wizards of the Coast hadn't done this, there would be a severe drought in the OSR. There would not be nearly as many game systems. What I imagine would have happened if there was no OGL is someone would have made their own game system that wouldn't have been sued, and then they themselves would have released it as an open game license. But thankfully, Wizards of the Coast took initiative and allowed there to be that creative freedom. Now, the OSR label includes D&D retro clones, and they are typically of OD&D and AD&D, Original Dungeons & Dragons and Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, and we see many an awesome spin on them, such as Swords and Wizardry, Labyrinth Lord, Basic Fantasy RPG, Lamentations of the Flame Princess, Castles and Crusades, the Old School Reference and Index compilation, Osric. And I'm going to tell you, that is just scratching the surface on what OSR systems have come out. There is dozens, if not hundreds, of fantastic things coming out. And by the way, I will be covering all of the namesake OSR game systems. I will be covering them, doing overviews and reviews, checking out the rules, running through some of the modules, and showing off the amazing game systems. The best way to ensure that you see those videos is by subscribing, hitting that bell icon, liking, commenting, so that I pop up in your feed. In addition to the open game license giving everyone free reign of what they wanted to create, we also had Matthew Finch, who is the creator of Osric, release his free and influential quick primer for old school gaming. This seriously helps out a lot of people getting into the OSR. By expanding and explaining what the OSR is, there has been a wealth of information given, and of course, so many amazing game systems spawned from it. Now, when it comes to the style of play of OSR, here we get a sampling that is There is a heavy emphasis on spontaneous ruling from the referee or game master, dungeon master, whatever the name is for the person that arbitrates the rules. We typically don't see massive tomes on what do you do in this exact scenario? How many rounds does this one effect take place if there is this thing on the side? This and that. No, we typically see that the game systems here are rather small. The idea behind this is it gives the players creativity in trying to attempt a whole bunch of different things, and it gives you the creativity to adjust accordingly. Instead of sitting there trying to thumb through the pages of a tome, trying to get the exact wording, just roll with it. Just run with it. Things are going to be spontaneous, and that is going to add a lot of fun to the table. In addition here, we also get the game balance is also de-emphasized in favor of a system that tests player skills and ingenuity in often strange and unfair situations. Balance and fairness. That is something that we've seen pop up in modern game systems. The sense that the players need to always have the fighting chance. The idea that the players can always come out of a situation no matter what the situation is. The idea of battles always being fair. That is not something that we see in the OSR. There is plenty of times where your players will go up against an encounter and it will be super simple and they'll steamroll it. And at the same time, there will be many times where your players get into engagement and it is next to impossible, if not impossible, for them to win. The players should expect to lose if they merely pit their numbers against the monsters and should instead attempt to outwit or outmaneuver challenges placed in their way. That's a big deal, right? We have this mentality now in newer games where war is sport. We have this idea that combat is fun. But in a lot of OSR systems, that's not the case. Combat is to be avoided at all cost. Combat means that someone can die. Combat means that you're draining resources. Combat means that there is something bad going to happen to you either now or later down the line. A perfect way to show this off is the fact that in many OSR systems, you get little or even no XP for killing monsters. Instead, you get XP for completing objectives, or getting gold, or any number of things. It's not just about killing the monsters, because if all of the XP does come from killing monsters, then of course you're going to go out and kill monsters. So giving players a reward for avoiding combat is an awesome feeling, because not only are they rewarded in the XP or whatever arbitrary system, but they're also rewarded in not dying. And for the last bit here, keeping maps comes highly recommended. Nowadays, we feel so blessed and so graced by buying any of these adventure paths, adventure modules, whatever the case may be, and you have this big ol' awesome map, you plop it down on the table, and the players get to see it in all their glory, and they get to look around and use it. But once again, that was not the case in the OSR. There's a lot of maps that you don't show off to your players. You can simply describe to them the room, and they have to fill in the blanks. Whether you choose to run this in the theater of the mind, or if your players decide to start mapping it down themselves. Either way is perfectly awesome. Another extremely large aspect of the OSR is timekeeping. The fact that over the course of time, the dungeon is trying to kill you. The wilderness is dangerous. Having strict timekeeping is going to keep your players on track and is going to make sure that your arbitration is fair. Because, and once again, in modern games, we typically don't think about the random encounters. Maybe we just give the players random encounters when we feel like it to spice things up. But in that OSR style play, you don't want that. Instead, you want there to be an arbitrary system of once your players explore around, maybe they explore around the dungeon for 10 whole minutes, then you roll a d6, and on a 1, then a random encounter will occur. Once again, simple systems like that are what make the OSR fantastic, as it's not just the DM presents a scenario and the players respond to it. No, you have the players going out there on their own and they dictate the scenarios. You as the GM are going to respond to whatever they ask in kind, but most important of all is that there's something in the middle between the two of you. There are these rules set in place. Everyone recognizes these rules, and to that degree, it is fair. Of course, the individual encounters they may be getting into seem unfair, but the fact that it's on the table right there in front of them is what makes it truly balanced. So what is the OSR? Well, the old school revival is simply a different way to play the game. The fact that there is just so many different game systems out there is absolutely fantastic, because what that means is once you start exploring around a bit, you can find the game system that's right for both you and your players. Don't stick to just one game system. Start moving around, seeing what works for you. As mentioned before, I will start reviewing and overviewing a lot of awesome OSR game systems, and I promise you, just taking a look at it is going to help you understand what you want out of your role-playing games. Of course, the staple example of all tabletop role-playing games right this moment is D&D 5th edition. It's totally awesome that we're getting this huge amount of people joining the gaming community through 5th edition, but at the same time, that's great for me because I know that so many people are going to trickle down and find their way to the OSR. So go ahead and tell me, has the OSR piqued your curiosity, or have you already delved right in? Do you think that one game system is good enough for both you and your players, or do you think you want to shop around a bit? And tell me down below what OSR system you want to see me review and overview, because I would love to hear everything you have to say about it. But that's going to do it for me. Thank you for watching, thanks for listening, and thank you to my amazing patrons. You guys are incredible, and I cannot wait to see you all in the next one.